Imagine standing in an ancient assembly hall. A politician rises to speak, suggesting compromise with an invading superpower. Within minutes, his colleagues murder him where he stands. His wife and children are dragged into the streets and executed by a mob of women. No trial, no debate. Just raw, primal violence masquerading as justice. This actually happened. Athens, 479 BC. The birthplace of democracy had transformed into something unrecognizable. The Persians had burned their city twice, slaughtered their sons, and turned their sacred temples into ash. The Athenians weren't interested in peace talks anymore. They wanted blood, and they were willing to sacrifice anyone who suggested otherwise. What you're about to hear is the story of Plataea, the battle that saved Western civilization by the thinnest of margins. It's a tale of desperation, catastrophic mistakes, and a final stand so brutal it turned the Greek soldiers from defenders into executioners. Before we dive into this forgotten chapter of ancient warfare, do me a favor. If stories like this fascinate you, if you believe history's most brutal truths deserve to be told without sugarcoating, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It blows my mind that we're connected across continents, digging into the darkest moments of human history together. Now, let's talk about why the Greeks were so terrified they murdered their own people. King Xerxes was gone. The Persian god-king had retreated back to his palace after the disaster at Salamis, but he left behind something far more dangerous than his royal presence. He left General Mardonius. Think of Mardonius as the anti-Xerxes. Where the king was theatrical and obsessed with spectacle, Mardonius was a predator, cold, calculating, efficient. He didn't care about parades or showing off the might of Persia. He cared about winning. And Xerxes had given him the perfect tool to do it. 300,000 of the Persian Empire's most elite killers. Not the conscripted farmers and slaves that had bloated Xerxes' army into an unmanageable circus. Mardonius had sent those people home. What remained was pure military excellence. The immortals, heavy infantry who fought with the discipline of machines. Scythian horse archers who could thread an arrow through a helmet slit at full gallop. Persian cavalry that moved like water, flowing around obstacles and drowning anyone caught in the open. Mardonius set up camp in Boeotia, occupying the flatlands near Thebes. And just to remind the Greeks that he was still very much in charge, he marched back to Athens and burned it again. Every wall the Athenians had started to rebuild, every home they'd tried to salvage, reduced to rubble and smoke, the message was clear. I'm not leaving, and you can't make me. The Athenian refugees, living in squalor on the island of Salamis, reached their breaking point. They couldn't fight Mardonius alone. They needed Sparta. But the Spartans were doing what Spartans do best when faced with someone else's problem. Absolutely nothing. They'd built a massive wall across the Isthmus of Corinth and decided that was good enough. Let the Persians have everything north of the wall. Sparta would be fine behind their fortifications. The Athenians sent envoys south with a message that bordered on a declaration of war. We have the largest navy in Greece. If you don't march north and help us, we're joining Persia. And when we do, your wall becomes irrelevant because our ships will land Persian troops on your beaches. It was diplomatic blackmail, and it worked. The Spartan leadership, the ephors, called an emergency session. They looked at each other and realized the nightmare scenario was real. A Persian-Athenian alliance would be unstoppable. So they did something that shocked everyone. They mobilized everything. 5,000 Spartiates, the full citizen warrior elite, strapped on their bronze and red cloaks. But here's the detail that shows just how seriously they took the threat. For every Spartiate, they armed 7 Helot slaves. That's 35,000 conscripted servants handed shields and spears, ordered to march to war alongside the men who enslaved them. Add in 5,000 more troops from allied cities, and you get an army of 45,000 men moving north before dawn. When the Athenian diplomats woke up the next morning, Ready to deliver another angry speech, the ephors just smiled and said, "Save your breath. The army left 12 hours ago. They're already at the border." The hunt had begun. While Sparta's army marched north, raising dust clouds visible for miles, Mardonius was already setting his trap. He understood something most people miss about ancient warfare. The Greeks were unbeatable in certain conditions. Put a phalanx of hoplites on narrow ground, shield to shield, spears forward, and they were a bronze wall that nothing could break. But tactics have weaknesses. The phalanx was slow. It turned like a battleship, and it needed solid footing. Take that same phalanx and put it on open, flat ground against cavalry, and it became a target. So Mardonius withdrew from Athens and headed north to the plains of Plataea. Wide open fields, perfect terrain for his horsemen to operate. He built a fortified camp near the Asopus River, a square mile of wooden palisades and towers. Essentially, he constructed a mobile fortress and dared the Greeks to come get him. The combined Greek army, now swelling with contingents from every city-state that hadn't collaborated with Persia, arrived at the southern edge of the plain. They looked down from the foothills of Mount Cithaeron and saw the nightmare spread out below them. Thousands of Persian tents, cavalry horses grazing in massive herds, the glint of armor catching the sunlight like a field of deadly flowers. Pausanias, the Spartan regent commanding the Greek forces, made the smartest decision of his career. He stopped. He refused to march down into that killing ground. Instead, the Greeks dug in along the rocky slopes where the Persian cavalry couldn't reach them. For days, the two armies stared at each other. Mardonius sitting comfortably in the valley, Pausanias clinging to the high ground, neither willing to give the other the advantage. But Mardonius wasn't content to wait forever. He decided to test the Greek resolve. He sent out his cavalry commander, a man named Mecistius. This guy was a legend in the Persian army. A giant of a man riding a Nisaean warhorse with a bridle made of solid gold. He led squadrons of cavalry right up to the Greek lines, circling and launching arrows, hurling insults, calling the Spartans cowards for hiding in the rocks. The Megarians, a Greek contingent holding part of the line, were getting shredded. They sent a desperate message to Pausanias. "Send reinforcements or we're leaving." Pausanias asked for volunteers. Who wants to go fight cavalry on open ground? It was a suicide mission. 300 Athenians stepped forward, an echo of Thermopylae. They rushed down the slope with their archers and slammed into the Persian horsemen in a chaotic, swirling melee. And then luck struck. An arrow hit Mecistius's horse in the side. The beast reared, throwing the giant commander to the ground. The Athenians swarmed him like ants on a beetle, hacking with their swords. But here's the insane part. They couldn't kill him. Mecistius was wearing scale armor under his purple cloak that their weapons couldn't penetrate. He was fighting back, a golden tank of a man, until one Athenian figured it out. He jammed a spear through the eye slit of Mecistius's helmet. The Persian cavalry went berserk trying to recover the body, but the Greeks held firm. They loaded the corpse onto a cart and paraded it through their ranks. It was a massive morale boost. They'd killed the enemy's champion. But Pausanias knew this was just the opening act. Mardonius was watching from below, and he wasn't smiling anymore. Here's what Hollywood never shows you about ancient warfare. The killing is dramatic, sure, but battles are won and lost based on water and bread. It was August. The Greek sun was merciless, beating down on men wearing 60 pounds of bronze armor. Every soldier was sweating through multiple liters of fluid per day. Dehydration could kill faster than any sword. Pausanias looked at his supply lines and realized they had a problem. They were too far from reliable water. Emboldened by the death of Mecistius, he ordered the entire army to shift position. 100,000 men shuffled down from the foothills toward the Asopus River, settling near a spring called Gargaphia. It seemed logical. Get closer to water. Maintain the high ground advantage. But Pausanias had just made a catastrophic error. He'd extended his supply lines, and Mardonius saw it immediately. The Persian general didn't order a frontal assault. He did something far more devastating. He sent his cavalry around the Greek flanks to attack their logistics. Persian horsemen ambushed a convoy of 500 supply wagons bringing food from the Peloponnese. They didn't just capture the supplies, they slaughtered the drivers and the oxen, leaving the carcasses to rot in the mountain passes. Overnight, the Greek army was cut off from food. For 8 days, the two armies sat there. The Greeks couldn't advance, because the open plain was a death trap. They couldn't retreat without looking like cowards. So they sat in the heat while Persian cavalry made daily raids, launching arrows and taunting them. "Come down and fight like men!" Pausanias held the line through sheer Spartan discipline. But discipline doesn't fill empty stomachs or quench thirst. On the 11th day, Mardonius decided he was tired of waiting. He ordered his cavalry to destroy the Gargaphia spring. They didn't just pollute it. They systematically trampled it with their horses, churning the clear water into thick, undrinkable mud. Picture the situation. You're a Greek soldier. You haven't eaten a proper meal in over a week. Your lips are cracked from dehydration. The only water source just got destroyed. Enemy cavalry controls the roads behind you. You're trapped. Panic spread through the coalition. The Athenians wanted to attack. The Corinthians wanted to retreat. The various city-states started arguing, and the fragile alliance was on the verge of collapse. Pausanias realized he had no choice. If they stayed another day, the army would disintegrate from thirst or mutiny. He made a decision that military historians still debate today. He ordered a night retreat in the face of the enemy, one of the most dangerous maneuvers in warfare. The plan was simple on paper. At the second watch of the night, the entire army would quietly pull back to a position called the island, closer to fresh water and the mountain. It required perfect silence, perfect coordination, and perfect timing. What actually happened was a comedy of errors that nearly destroyed Western civilization. As darkness fell and the moon rose over Mount Cithaeron, the Greeks prepared to move. The signal was given, and immediately everything fell apart. The center of the Greek line, troops from Corinth, Megara, and other city-states, didn't withdraw tactically. They panicked. They grabbed their shields and ran. They didn't stop at the agreed-upon position. They kept running all the way back to the town of Plataea itself, huddling around the Temple of Hera. In the darkness, the Greek army had just lost 50% of its strength to fear. But on the right wing, where the Spartans were positioned, the problem wasn't cowardice, it was pride. Enter Captain Amompharetus, commander of the Pitonate Locos, one of Sparta's most prestigious units. When the order came down to withdraw, Amompharetus refused. He stood there, surrounded by his men, and told Pausanias, the supreme commander of all Greek forces, that he would not shame Sparta by running from the strangers. That was his contemptuous term for the Persians. Imagine this scene. It's 2 a.m, pitch black. The rest of the army is trying to sneak away in silence. And here's Pausanias, regent of Sparta, having a screaming argument with one of his own captains. Pausanias begged. He explained it wasn't a retreat, it was a tactical repositioning. Amompharetus didn't care about semantics. To him, walking backward was heresy. The argument became physical. Amompharetus picked up a massive boulder from the riverbed. He slammed it down at Pausanias' feet with a crash that probably echoed across the valley. He pointed at the rock and shouted, "With this pebble I cast my vote not to flee." In Spartan democracy, they voted by dropping pebbles into urns. Amompharetus was mockingly using a boulder to vote for death. While this absurd drama unfolded, the Athenians on the left wing sat there confused. They knew the Spartans were supposed to move first, but nothing was happening. They sent a runner to check. The messenger arrived to find Spartan commanders screaming at each other while the army stood frozen. Pausanias, exhausted and furious, made a desperate decision. He ordered the main Spartan force to begin retreating, hoping Amompharetus would follow once he realized he was being left behind. It was a game of chicken played with thousands of lives. The Spartan column began marching south, constantly looking back. And finally, when Amompharetus realized he was truly about to face 300,000 Persians alone, his pride cracked. He ordered his men to jog and catch up. But it was too late. The sky was turning gray. Birds were singing. The sun was rising over the mountains. From the Persian camp, sentries rubbed their eyes and looked out at the Greek positions. The center was gone. The Athenians were miles away, obscured by hills, and on the opposite side, strung out along the ridges in a disorganized mess, were the Spartans. Separated, exposed, vulnerable. General Mardonius stepped out of his tent and saw the gift the gods had handed him. He didn't see a tactical withdrawal. He saw a rout. He saw a broken army fleeing in terror. He turned to his officers, laughing, mocking the legendary Spartans. Are these the men who never run? Look at them scurrying like rats. He didn't wait for complex battle formations. He didn't consult with his advisors. He simply pointed at the retreating red cloaks and screamed one word. Get them! The dam broke. Persian cavalry thundered across the river. Behind them, the immortals and thousands of infantry began to run, screaming war cries. There was no order, no discipline, just a massive tidal wave of humanity rushing toward the isolated Spartans. Pausanias heard the thunder of hooves and the roar of thousands of voices. He turned and saw the nightmare racing toward his exposed flank. Every tactical advantage had evaporated. His army was scattered. Half his coalition had fled. And now the entire Persian war machine was bearing down on less than 10,000 Spartans, caught in the open. This was the moment, the hinge of history. If the Spartans broke and ran, Greece would fall. Western civilization as we know it would never exist. Democracy, philosophy, theater, all of it would be crushed under Persian boots. Pausanias made a decision that defined Spartan culture. He stopped retreating. He turned his men around and formed the phalanx. Shields locked, spears forward. And then he did something that shows the desperate nature of their situation. He began sacrificing animals to the gods, praying for divine favor, while Persian arrows started falling around him like deadly rain. The Spartans stood there, shields raised, absorbing arrow after arrow, while their commander killed goat after goat, reading the entrails. The omens were bad. Again and again, the sacrifices came back unfavorable. Spartans were dying, shot through gaps in their shields. And Pausanias kept sacrificing, kept praying. Imagine being one of those soldiers. Your comrades are falling. Arrows are slamming into your shield. The enemy is getting closer. And your commander is on his knees covered in animal blood, begging the gods for permission to fight back. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity, Pausanias looked up from a sacrifice and declared the gods were favorable. He stood, covered in blood and dust, raised his spear, and screamed the order to advance. The Spartans surged forward, and what happened next became legend. The Persians had never fought Spartans on their terms before. At Thermopylae, the terrain had been so narrow, only a fraction of forces could engage. Here, it was the full weight of Spartan fury unleashed. The phalanx crashed into the Persian lines like a bronze tsunami. Spears punched through wicker shields and linen armor. The Persians fought back with desperate courage, grabbing Spartan spears with their bare hands, breaking them, trying to create gaps in the wall of bronze. But the Spartans were fighting for survival. They pushed forward, stepping over the bodies of the fallen, driving the Persians back step by bloody step. And then Mardonius made his fatal mistake. He personally led his household guard forward, trying to rally his troops by example. He rode into the thick of the fighting on his white horse, a target impossible to miss. A Spartan soldier whose name history didn't record hurled a rock, not a pebble, not a stone, a rock the size of a man's head. It struck Mardonius in the skull. The general of the Persian army, the man who had held Greece hostage for months, fell from his horse and died in the dust. The death of Mardonius broke the Persian army's spirit. The elite troops around him were slaughtered by the advancing Spartans. The rest of the Persian forces saw their general fall, and panic spread like wildfire. They began to retreat slowly at first, then faster, then it became a full rout. The Persians fled back to their fortified camp, that square mile of wooden walls they'd built. They thought they'd be safe there. They were wrong. The Athenians, who had been separated on the opposite flank, finally arrived. They'd been fighting the Theban Greeks, Persian collaborators who fought with savage determination. But when the Athenians heard the Spartans had broken through, they disengaged and rushed to join the slaughter. What happened at the Persian camp wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The Greeks, traumatized by months of starvation and humiliation, their cities burned, their families killed, unleashed every ounce of rage they'd been holding back. They scaled the walls. They tore through the defenders. They showed no mercy. Of the 300,000 Persians who had wintered in Greece, only 40,000 escaped. The rest were killed in the camp or hunted down during the retreat. The Greeks didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate surrender. They butchered every Persian they could catch. Mardonius's body was never found. Some said it was buried in secret. Others claimed it was taken by Persian loyalists. The most likely explanation is that it was so mutilated during the fighting that it became unrecognizable among the thousands of corpses littering the field. The Greeks had won. But the victory came at a cost that went beyond casualties. They had started the war as defenders of civilization. They ended it as executioners. The murder of Lycidas and his family at the beginning of this story wasn't an aberration. It was a preview of what Greece had become. Plataea broke the Persian invasion of Greece permanently. Xerxes never returned. The empire that had conquered most of the known world couldn't break the will of a fractured coalition of Greek city-states who hated each other almost as much as they hated Persia. But here's the uncomfortable truth that gets left out of the heroic narratives. The Greeks didn't go back to being peaceful philosophers and democratic thinkers after Plataea. Within 50 years, they'd be fighting each other in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict so brutal it made the Persian invasion look civilized by comparison. Plataea saved Western civilization, yes, but it also revealed something dark about human nature. When people are pushed far enough, when they're traumatized and terrified and backed into a corner, they don't just fight back. They become the thing they were fighting against. They become monsters wearing the mask of righteousness. The Greeks who stoned Lycidas to death weren't evil. They were desperate. The soldiers who slaughtered the Persians at Plataea weren't bloodthirsty savages. They were survivors who'd been pushed to the breaking point. And that's the real lesson of this battle. Civilization is fragile. It's a thin veneer that can crack under pressure, revealing the brutal animal underneath. So the next time you hear someone talk about the glory of ancient Greece, remember Plataea. Remember that democracy was saved by men who murdered their own citizens for suggesting peace. Remember that Western philosophy was preserved by soldiers who became butchers when their backs were against the wall. History isn't clean. It isn't heroic. It's messy and brutal and complicated, and that's exactly why it matters. If this story made you think differently about ancient history, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this video with someone who thinks they know the story of ancient Greece. And drop a comment telling me which historical battle you want me to cover next. Because there are thousands of stories like this, buried in the footnotes of history books, waiting to be told without the sanitized Hollywood version. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll dig into another chapter of humanity's darkest and most fascinating moments.